Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with an Architect. And today's program is sponsored by Imagine It. And our host is Lee Hopkinson, our Allied Member Director. We have a very special discussion this morning, and I will turn it over to Lee to introduce our speakers and enjoy. Have some coffee and enjoy.
Thanks, Randy. Well, welcome everybody. Really glad you could take a few minutes out of your morning to join us to hear from a very engaging, fantastic panel discussion on IPD and LEAN on an amazing project that was done here in Henderson, the Henderson Hospital team. We started this Coffee with an Architect earlier this year, and pretty great to see where it's come to. Typically, it was just talking to one architect. It's now morphed into this incredible panel discussion that we're going to present here shortly. And nice for me is not only do I get to be your moderator and host, but we also, Imagine It is also sponsoring this particular segment. So with that, I want to go ahead and give you just a little brief overview of Imagine It. Why is this not moving? There we go. And we're going to do that with a little quick 30-second video. Excellent, thank you. Moving right along. Oops.
Oh, take two.
Hey, I wanted to play it a second time. Our panels today are three really intriguing individuals that were part of an even bigger team on this Henderson Hospital. And so Joe Garcia is from SR Construction, Steve Willis is from HMC, and Tom Anderson is from TJK. I'm going to go ahead and let each of these gentlemen just give a quick bio and introduction of themselves, and then we'll actually get into the conversation. So Joe, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks Lee. So I'll start out. I am currently the project executive for healthcare at SR Construction. Other than that, I won't bore you with my resume and the details. If anybody's looking for or interested in more reliable project deliveries, they can look me up on LinkedIn. But you guys came here to get value out of what Steve and Tom have to say and from some of the experiences that we learned at Henderson. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a principal with HMC Architects. I was the principal in charge for the design side of the project. I won't bore you with if you want to find some boring stuff on me, you can also find me on LinkedIn. But thank you guys for inviting us. I'll enjoy this presentation to you guys.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tom Anderson. I'm the owner and principal engineer at TJK Consulting Engineers, and we are a multidisciplinary engineering firm that started here in Las Vegas in 1986. My experience with the hospital work began back in 1997 when I worked on UMC Hospital, and that ranged from a lot of upgrading of facilities to going buildings and rebuilding new ones. And then when I started with Henderson Hospital team in 2014, and it's been a great experience working over there and getting to be involved in the LEAN process and IPD. And I'm just looking forward to talking with everybody here this morning.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. So to start off, I don't know why this isn't going. A little exercise for you guys as we're going along this presentation this morning. So one of the LEAN principles and values that come out of a LEAN philosophy and an IPD working team is a exercise called plus delta. And really the plus delta is designed for the team as a whole to basically do a report card, what worked, what didn't work. And so as we go along the presentation today, I'd ask you to keep in mind specifically that. What did you like out of the presentation? What did you not like out of the presentation? And at the end, we'll circle back around with some of those thoughts and comments by asking you guys to chime in. I'm sure you'll see probably questions pop up or comments pop up throughout the presentations on what Plus Delta did for the team as a whole. Starting off though, we wanted to go ahead and get some background on the project itself. And so to do so, I wanted to ask Steve to just give a background on the Henderson project.
Sure. Thank you very much. So as a project, you know, the project was we working on the first phase of a master plan for Henderson, Nevada, as part of an overall what they call a health park. It had a number of other programs, a fitness center, some wellness centers, and a few other things. We were the first domino, if you will, in this health park that they envisioned for Henderson. Our first phase was a 30-acre site. It was designed for 247,000 square foot acute care hospital, 142 licensed beds. We shelled 36 beds and 2 ORs as a part of the first phase. It has one specialties and a GI lab. Its original cost total, and Joe always corrects me if I get this wrong, so I better get it right. You know, because we're talking total value or just project value, but their total original project total target cost was $170 million. Adjusted for the ORs and the MOB, came out to be about $181 million. So great project. As this drawing shows here, they've already moved on to a couple of other programs and some additions onto the building that we were not a part of. There's some other firms that have come out and done some work out here, and I'll let Joe speak to those if you want to speak to him, Joe. But it was a great project. Started back in 2014 after we had just completed another hospital in Temecula, California, for the same owner. We rolled right over from that hospital, which opened up in 2013, into this one with pretty much the same team, with the addition of HR in 2014, and continued that great relationship.
Excellent. Before I ask Joe and Tom to chime in a little bit on the project, don't forget, we want this to be engaging, but we would prefer most of the questions to be answered towards the end, unless it's very, very specific to the screen that we're on. To do so, if you wouldn't mind just typing those questions into the chat box. Kaylee is capturing all those questions for us, and we'll be asking those questions at the end and getting you guys some answers back. So with that, Joe and Tom, any feedback from your side on the Henderson Hospital project?
I think from Tom and my perspective, the project started in 2014 with onboarding team partners and developing the project team. Design started immediately in May of 2014. We started putting dirt in a big hole in October of 2014, and we technically broke ground in June of 2015, and had a license for the facility opened operational heads and beds October of 2016. So about 16 months from the time we physically started doing dirt work until we actually opened the facility. So for the client, it was a significantly beneficial project for them. And I was going to mention, for Tom and I, we haven't left since 2016. We've been doing work for the facility, continuing to grow it and develop it since 2016.
Oh,
Yeah,
huge project.
one other thing too, having the Temecula team come in from already doing the IPD work with the hospital was really great, because they came in and they pretty much were teaching us, like someone like me who hadn't done a lot of lean IPD projects, were teaching us all these terms and what they meant and how to do them. And because they already had experience, that really helped kickstart us into trying to understand what it meant to have a lean IPD project.
Tom, thank you for sharing that. It's actually a great segue into why did you guys go into an IPD methodology versus a design build bid, or a design build, or any of the other delivery methodologies? And so, Joe, maybe you could share a little bit in regards to the whole premise of this particular Coffee with Architects is to share best practice of an IPD and lean team. So maybe you could provide some details and insight into what is an IPD lean team.
Yeah, I may not be the best person to explain that, but I'll take a crack at that, Lee. So UHS, Universal Health Services, like many healthcare organizations, spurred by Sutter's interest in more reliable deliveries and their 5 big ideas, had seen success in more reliable deliveries from integrated project delivery, lean project delivery, or combinations or hybrids of an integrated project team, the tri-party agreement. They had, like Steve and Tom had already mentioned, had experienced some success with the Temecula project, a similar facility, a similar size, 170 bed facility. But they were convinced that the traditional approach didn't provide them adequate benefit. As most of us know, the traditional owner go get an architect, start design, develop drawings and plans, and then take it out on the street is adversarial from day one, and it doesn't necessarily provide the client the best benefits that they can realize. The architect team definitely not the best benefits, because they're sometimes put in the middle between the contractor and the owner, and the contractor always feels like they're trying to defend themselves and still try to provide the client best value. It just isn't set up to be extremely beneficial to the client or anybody else on the project team. So there are other alternatives to getting better collaboration and cooperation from everybody, but it starts with having the right attitudes and setting up the project from day one with the mindset that, hey, we're going to do this together, one team, one goal.
So thank you, Joe. So Tom, you mentioned prior to this that you hadn't been on too many IPD projects, and it was nice to kind of get the Temecula team to showcase why this methodology might work best. What was maybe one of the best things that came out of an IPD performance team that you recognized going into this?
Coming from the IPD team, I think the best thing was the conversations were cross-platform. So like Joe said, we were filling up a big hole with dirt, and you know, people in that meeting, like me, electrical engineer, I don't play in dirt too often, but they wanted that input from people who don't think in that same box. And they wanted these crazy conversations because they could potentially use that to save money or push us in a different direction. And those were some of the features that I think were great in how we began the project. So the people that were on the team were always asking questions, and they weren't just asking questions in their silos. They were doing it with a big group of people.
Thank you, Tom. Steve, you want to add anything to that, especially since it seems like in an IPD delivery method, the design team and the contractor are working more hand in hand than in any of the other platforms. So from your perspective, the design side, any thoughts that you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just quickly, I mean, our contract agreement, we were working on an IFOA, which is an integrated form of agreement. There was a multi-party contractor agreement. It had 9 signers to that contract. Us, MEP, electrical, the 2 GCs. We had 3 GCs on this job. We had Turner, SR, and Pinta for offsite. Getting 9 signers and 3 GCs to work collaboratively, hand in hand, understanding when you come to a project in a traditional approach that everybody comes with a list of risks that they are trying to push off on somebody else, right? And an IFO way, there's no place to push risk. It's all shared risk now, which means it's all now shared reward and shared problem solving. There's no reason to go hiding your risk or go fighting to protect your risk, because you're all in the same contract, you all have the same outcome. you're all pulling from the same bucket. So it immediately creates an environment where it removes a significant amount of conflict from the process. And everybody are free to collaborate, be very open. It's now working on just the personalities of GCs, designers, and tradespeople all being in the same room, needing to speak the same language and focusing on the same issues. That becomes the challenge, right? It's a lot less to work on than hiding risk and protecting and taking care of your lawyers.
Gotta love lawyers. Well,
Yeah.
that's actually leads into the next screen, which is talking about all the players that are going to come into this. You know, there's a core group of people that is considered to be the center of this IPD team, and then there's everybody on the outside of that core group that really still has to take on this IFOA IPD lean principle mentality. And so, and this is an open question to the entire panel, how did you get all these other entities to come into that type of a mindset? How was it working together as a team? How was, what were some of the challenges that came across, and how did you overcome them?
If my fellow panelists don't mind, I'll give some upfront stuff. We, having come from Temecula and done an IFOA, which was we were a 6-party team. We immediately identify who we think are the most important people we think need to be on the contract and collaborating and sharing risk. That's obviously the designer, the owner, the GC. We think MEP, those that have the largest pieces of the quote unquote budget or scope, we want them as a signer. MEPs, structural, electrical, mechanical. And then we discovered in a discussion that drywall typically comes up as a really big factor. So we wanted drywall. From that experience and coming into Henderson, we talked about it again and talked about who else do we think should be in this based on that experience. And we came up with fire protection because they can wreak havoc on a budget and schedule. Civil engineers play a huge part, especially in a greenfield, about success and failure. We wanted them as a signer to the contract also. And, everybody brought up perspective about who they thought should be a part of the contract. And then everybody who was not directly on that contract, we worked really hard to incentivize them to collaborate with us to make a success. So there were rewards for them too, just not as much risk.
First of all, texting him and texting him, and he's not even responding.
Okay, somebody else had some colorful commentary on the background.
I thought somebody had a serious reply.
Just been working from home.
That
was awesome.
That was awesome.
So I know one thing I saw on this integrated project conversation was mindset. So coming from a standard design bid build conversation made some of our conversations go sideways at the beginning until we were really understanding that everybody was really having the same focus. So I think that was a big change in our team when we started to see people who come from that typical direction switching over to understand how the project was really intending to move forward.
Julian Plato.
We probably want to mute those
you might want to mute
who are talking. I think someone's forgotten their mute is off.
And from my perspective, some of the challenges with the IPD team was rapidly developing the trust. Like Steve said, we had 3 general contractors, an architect, civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, a steel detailer and fabricator, a Division 9 contractor. It sounds like a man walks into a bar joke more than a productive, cohesive project team. So rapidly developing trust between those groups early on in the project was imperative to us being successful as a team. And we had some challenges, we had some struggles, and we finally said, hey, we've got some breakdowns and we've got to address some of these things to get everybody in better alignment. We did some things like study action teams. We as a group read the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which was huge for us because we identified some of the differences between our teams. We did a strength finders exercise to see how people were wired and what made them tick and what their strengths were and how we could better leverage those as a project. And we also did some fun stuff. We, as a project team, we participated in Corporate Challenge, the Las Vegas Corporate Challenge. Everybody got together and we competed in individual sports and things, and we competed as a team. And those things brought us together to become more cohesive and more productive and truly like a family.
Yeah, yeah. The best example I can give you guys is that each one of these companies, all these companies come experts in what they do. They don't get to be on the team without passing that bar first. So that's not a question. Whether you can do your job is not the question. The question is, can you do it in a collaborative environment with others and use that knowledge to its best advantage to advance the entire project? No company is set up like that. We're all set up to take care of our individual companies, deliver our individual work, make our individual profits, and hopefully protect our individual back ends from risk. That's how we are designed. That's how we're set up. We're protecting ourselves from each other, not collaborating with each other. So when you come into a group like this, it's like boot camp, 16 weeks of hardcore stripping away all that other crap that you came with that's not necessarily doing the job, and keeping the stuff that's what's needed for the job, your expertise. It's a lot of personality stuff. And as Joe said, a lot of trust building, right? That you have my interests in mind, not you know how to do your job. That's given. That you have my interests as a front of whatever interest you may have had when you got here is what I want to know.
A very, very much a common goal.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So, you know, with that, I can appreciate the military analogy and the 16 weeks of boot camp as going through that prior. I recognize that one of the fundamental things they do is to bring that team together and break them down so everybody is on the same page. So that's cool. I did want to go back one slide because I wanted to ask Tom. You know, I'm a big believer that mission statements help drive successful projects, and the Henderson Hospital project did have a mission statement. And I think, you know, the three of you, certainly I want to hear your thoughts on this, but it's important for everybody to kind of understand what that mission statement is. So Tom, any insight from, you know, how this particular project mission statement was crafted? What did you get out of it? How it was presented to everybody, and what was maybe the benefit of it? We'll start with you and go to Joe and then to Steve.
Yeah, so for a mission statement, I don't think I've ever been on a project that created a mission statement. So this was a first for me. And I think the reason why it worked, or the reason why it became a driving force, was we did this in what we call the big room. That's a room where everybody is in there, the designers, the constructors, the owners, the users. So all of our different agendas, like we were just discussing, are represented there. And there could be upwards of 50 people in there. And that created the force and the alignment early to allow us to build this mission statement. And then it also allowed us to go back to the statement to drive the team in the right direction. When we were talking about, we want, you know, XYZ on the project, we would back to here. Does that meet the budget? Does that meet our expectations? And then sort of bring it back, because when you get that many people in a room, you know, sometimes, you know, you want to gold plate your own stuff. And this just helped create that direction better for us.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Joe?
From my perspective, the mere process of developing the mission statement, regardless of the words and the arrangement of them, created bonds that really last to this day. I mean, I got an invite yesterday from the regional project manager for this project that was done 5 years ago, saying, hey, we're getting our annual get together so we can all kind of see where we're at in life and what's going on in our respective lives and things like that. So just going through the process and developing one was significantly important to the team. Like Tom said, most projects don't have a mission statement.
Yeah. As they said, the mission statement is a culmination of the input of everybody on the team. It is literally a graphic presentation of skin in the game, right? Everybody has contributed something to that statement. Owner, GCs, there's something in there for everybody. The waste, removing waste from the process, you know, saving money, operational efficiencies. That's hospital jargon right there, right? You know, these all are a combination of our conditions of satisfaction, two lists that Joe's probably going to talk about later on, of things that we needed to do in order to feel like we were a success, right? And as a result of so much skin in the game, we still have a connection. It's like ex-war buddies. We get together every year to talk about the great time we had, the relationships we made, how fun of, you know, not often you can deliver that much of the hospital in that fast and then love every minute of it. Usually you walk away a little beat down and worn out, but we loved every minute of it. And this statement is a reflection of that.
So Steve, staying with you, you know, and this is an AIA event, I figured that this particular statement, this is coming straight out of the AIA Integrated Project Delivery, which is the guide that they put out. And you've mentioned some of this already, but any additional thoughts, and, you know, specifically on the highlighted itself was what caught my attention.
Yeah, you know, the hardest part about the design process is that we have many masters throughout the design process. And for my colleagues out there, I don't like to use the word masters, but people we are catering to, right? We're catering to an owner to bring to fruition his concept, his design, right? That includes financial returns and operational returns. It's a lot involved in that. Then we have to meet jurisdictional requirements, code requirements to pass that bar. And then there's, at the end of that road is the GC, who has a set of requirements in order to build it to meet his needs, his desires, in order to build it. Otherwise, we're going to get an earful of change orders and RFIs from him. Being able to collaborate with everyone before I put a single line to paper at the front, and the only real unknown is the agency, because they're not in this process. But we even created a process that brought them into our process early on to make them as little a surprise throughout the process as possible. I got a freaking email from the city planner just saying hello, you know, how are you doing? Enjoyed your project. 4 years after the project. I've never gotten something like that from a city planner. He's like a friend, you know, wants to connect with me on LinkedIn. We create a lot of connections so we all understand what each other's doing, what each other's needs is before we draw anything. We first seek to understand, and then we execute. That removes so much stress from the designer in the process. We're putting only on paper what's needed for all three parties to deliver real value, you know, to the owner, and in this case to the community.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Thanks. You know, from the GC side, Joe, when you see the words that are articulated on the AIA document, and any thoughts recognizing that, you know, it's really more now of a collaborative effort from your side than it ever was?
For us, as an organization, we try to treat every project like it's an integrated project delivery, regardless of the contract format or the client's desire for maybe a more traditional delivery approach, because we have seen the benefits of the collaboration and getting the team together early and try to leverage that on every project. Kind of bouncing back to the tenets of lean, respect for people and elimination of waste. We just see that there's so much waste in the traditional delivery process that we try to treat every project like an integrated project.
You know, being a fan of the lean philosophy, one of the biggest takeaways that I get out of there is the elimination of waste, or in maybe a little bit better terms for our projects, the rework. So what did you find on this particular project utilizing lean principles and an IPD, and what you're doing currently, even if it's not an IPD project? You know, what are you doing to minimize that rework of that waste?
Well, we're trying to have better conversations up front with our trade partners so that they understand, kind of like Steve had said, first seek to understand and then execute. So we make sure that when we're at the board, we're having our full plan, we're having the conversations about how we're going to execute the work. We try to minimize and plan the work before they go out in the field to do the work, because then it gets real expensive if they find that they've got problems or they haven't planned the work adequately. it still happens, but it's now 2% of the time instead of 10% of the time.
We use a term we usually throw around a lot: go slow to go fast, right? So we will be excruciatingly detailed with each other about what we need, how we want to get it done, because we've been doing this so long. Most of our 80% of our processes are on autopilot, and if you're not careful, you're flying off to some place far away, and you're flying in the wrong direction. We're just that fast and that good. But so we had a really hard time slowing down to understand each other, to take into account each other's needs, what each other really needs, and not what I think they need based on the contracts I did 5 years ago. What do you need today? And then executing only what it's having the discipline to only execute what you actually need, because it's a lot easier for me to execute a template, right? It's all written there. I've done it 1,000 times. I can do it in my sleep and a fork in my hand. But when I have to stop and think and tailor it to remove all the stuff that's irrelevant to this need, takes patience and time. But once that part of the conversation is done, there's a significant amount of return on the back end when we're delivering the work. It's an amazing amount of return.
Always about the ROI, isn't it?
Always, always.
So, one of the roles we didn't talk too much about, I want to go back one screen, is maybe if each of you could provide some perspective on the role of the owner in an integrated project delivery. We've talked about it from a consultant, we've talked about it from a design and from a construction, but what's the role of the owner? What's the liability of the owner? What's the responsibility for the owner? And what's the expectations of the owner? Any one of you can start to chime in.
Joe, you want to go first?
Sure. From my perspective, it's the tiebreaker, the guy that makes the decision when we can't come to a decision that is in alignment with our mission statement and serves the client or the project specifically. Most of the time we could get through those and make those decisions, but occasionally we'd have to say, hey, Tim, here's our problem. Which way do we want to go here? And to kind of keep us in check, make sure that we're not heading off the tracks or, like Steve said, flying in the wrong direction. But I mean, that really was his role and responsibility. He had an equal seat in all of the discussions that we had. So he was monitoring, but he usually let us make the decisions until we ran into an obstacle or a constraint, and then he would usually clear that for us.
I agree. Tom?
Yeah, from my point of view, having the owner there was typically, we're, as an engineer, we're sort of screened between the architect and the owner. They have their conversations and then it brings back to us. In this case, we were right there with it. So we had conversations directly with them when we didn't understand what was being asked of us at the time. Plus, they would, being that this was a new hospital, a lot of the staff wasn't available for us to talk with, but they would put us in touch with either people in similar roles or people they were interviewing to bring into these roles. So I think that provided us a lot of direction that we used to create the design. And even now we're seeing these roles change in the hospital, and they come back and these new people are asking for different things in the same exact area that we only created 6 years ago.
Yeah. Tom said a very important thing. Having everybody in the room at the same time hearing the same conversation removes so much confusion, right? When you pass stuff from person to person, trade to trade, it's bad enough when you pass it from person to person. Be it trade to trade, be it discipline to discipline. There's so much that gets lost in all that translating. It's literally, the UN. It's a bunch of translating. And if everyone's not hearing it at the same time and having the opportunity to question from their perspective, Joe can question the owner about something from the GC's perspective. I will question the owner about something from the designer perspective. Tom will question something to the owner from the trade partner perspective. But I get to hear everybody's perspective and everybody's answer and modify my approach based on what I heard right then and there. You don't have any idea how much time you cut out of a process when you do it like that. What this conversation we just said would take 2 weeks to complete, when the way we did it, we just did it in an hour. We could do it in a few minutes, and on the project, you can do it in an hour. an amazing amount of return. And everybody agrees to the solution. Everybody sees everyone else's heads nod. And I have the confidence that as I move and when we're done, everybody will be satisfied with the outcome because I had their input on in the beginning.
So in a former life, I had the opportunity to work for a GC and went through a similar IFOA on a hospital, and I got to see that big room. And that big room, it really is impressive. And for everybody that's chiming in right now, it literally is. Everybody's in a big room, and that the ability to facilitate information amongst each other is incredible because it does mitigate that whole UN analogy that Steve spoke about. But any additional thoughts from any of you guys on the big room itself?
Organized chaos. From my perspective, it can be a little intimidating at first, having all these people who are experts in what they do, questioning what you do, and you questioning what they do, and quite frankly, challenging each other. Why are you doing it that way? Don't tell me you're doing it because you did it on your last project like that. That's not what I want to hear. I want to hear why you're doing it for this project. Is it applicable? Does it work? Is it the best response? You cannot be thin-skinned and be in a big room because everybody's going to challenge you and make you convince them that that's the way it should be done.
Yeah, from our perspective, it is again a way of life at this point in our careers, and they take more time, and you have more meetings, and they're longer meetings. The challenge is making sure you have the right people at the meeting, so that we don't have to reiterate those conversations, and or be able to get outcomes and decisions made at those meetings is probably the best benefit, because like Steve said, things that sometimes take weeks to get resolved can get resolved in a matter of minutes in the big room.
Any thoughts on the big room?
Yeah, that's the same thing I was going to say. Is we have, you know, we're all going through our design world or the things that we know, and we make assumptions until we see differently in the design package. But on this, I could literally just walk up to the concrete guy and ask him, say, are we doing it this way on this job? And landscape person, are we doing it this way on this job? And they would literally just have an answer right then. And if we didn't have an answer, then we would go, you know, speak to someone with the pocketbook and say, hey, we have some choices. How do we want to make this happen? So those things, typically you go through design and you design them once, and then you hear that it's cost too much or wasn't the right thing, and then you redesign it. And to me, that's the benefit of having all these people spending their time in one room, and you know, having a project that can afford to do that, I think pays off in the end. You just have to get past that first conversation of how do you afford to have all these people in a room at the beginning.
I mean, I've told people, quite frankly, it's not ability to afford, because, you know, 90% of the people who get to be in a big room are decision makers. They're not just they're not spectators. There are very few spectators in a big room. Most are I like to say, my favorite word is combatants, you know, and they are decision makers. You can't be there if you're not a decision maker. And we get together, like Tom said, you can ask a question and get a legitimate response and know that that is a legitimate response. And the guy will say, or the person will say, if they need to, there's one other person I need to talk to, but I'll get right back to you. You know they're gonna get right back to you. And that is, like I said, having that kind of decision making that fast in a room, it seems, you know, you're taking costs that efforts that cost you 3 times as much at the end, and you're pushing to the front and reducing that cost to you know, a quarter of what it may have cost you if you let it drag out for a year and then ask the question, right? The answer becomes a lot more expensive than upfront. I tell people all the time, it is the best check you will ever write is upfront collaboration before people waste their time drawing or building anything.
Go slow to go fast, and the only reason Steve uses combatants is because command is in his top 5 and his strength binders.
It is. See, Joe remembers that after 5 years.
Crazy. I see the bond is definitely still there.
Yeah.
Still there and going. Hey, I want to encourage you guys. Rick, John, and Warren, I do see your questions. We will get to them. I do want to encourage the rest of you, if you have any questions, send it over. Kaylee is monitoring the chat box. We will have time at the end to address these questions. So thank you. Sticking on the subject of collaboration, you know, one of the things that Tom, you have to deal with is a lot of utilizing of the BIM tools in clash detection and a high degree of precision provided within a successful project. How did you find that working in a lean environment encouraged reducing waste?
Yeah, there is definitely the picture you're showing there is again, like, you know, our BIM group put together all this information into one model, and they continually met on a weekly status to review this. So as we were designing, people were looking at sections of the space to make sure that they would be able to fit everything. One of our big goals was to do things right and do them once. So we have what we reference as a last planner process. So we would all get back in that same room, and there would be multiple conversations all over the place to make agreements on when work would be complete. And by work, I'm not necessarily talking just construction. We're also talking design. Like, you know, before I lay out the ceiling grid and the mechanical and electrical, invariably always lay our lights over the top of diffusers. Well, that's a lot of waste that we would find there. So we would make decisions on, you know, first I'll do my lighting calcs and I'll tell you where the lights want to be. And then we can discuss how we adjust that to meet the mechanical diffuser layout. So things like that, even though they sound small, but those are a lot of wasted time. And that's where this last planner system comes into effect. We found in our process that the designers have it's more of a challenge for the design team to do the last planner pull plan. And, you know, I don't know, Joe can maybe speak to that a little bit. While the contractors, I mean, they can't literally build something in a wall if the wall doesn't exist, where we can still put stuff together as the room is moving around. So I don't know if I'm being very clear on that, but we found a lot more challenge on deciding who went first in design and what we needed in design. And there was lots of back and forth conversations that people had to rally the team back to focus in that big room with those 50 some people trying to make decisions for everybody at the same time.
Tom, do you think it's important to maybe talk about some of the prefab that we did for the underground, for the electrical, and that to help reduce waste and save a significant amount of time? Because I think that was a huge part of the success of the project.
Well, I think we definitely had a couple different conversations on what we should prefab and what we shouldn't. I know when the electrical contractor prefab all of our underground for the electrical rooms, that, you know, they built it off-site and put it back together on-site, and, you know, that saved a lot of time, even though it added some, again, coordination for how we were going to build the whole that corner of the building. That if we would have not done that as a team, then the length of time they spent to construct this would have been longer, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. Let's go to, so Joe, you know, you talked a lot about in your beginning about IPD and lean, about the innovation and the failures and the opportunities that kind of delivery methodology provides. Any additional thoughts you'd like to share on the success of Henderson Hospital due to the fact that it was a lean IPD team?
This is a breakfast call, right? We only have a few more minutes, so
yeah, okay, maybe just one or two thoughts.
Try to keep it short. So that's because that's a lot of questions: innovation, failures, and opportunities. From the innovation perspective, we had a team set up across platform cluster group, as we call them, for innovations to monitor and bring in ideas and really back to kind of probably the most important point is people build hospitals, people build buildings, and without letting these folks and the people that are involved with these projects truly feel like they're part of the process and part of developing the project, we're not going to yield the best ideas. So we set up the innovation cluster across platforms, mechanical, electrical, plumbing trade partners, concrete trade partners. All of the team members had an opportunity to be part of the innovation cluster. We developed over 150 great ideas. We had numerous A3s, which are really studying a problem and how we could put work in place better, or evaluate one system versus another system, or one structural system versus another structural system. And hundreds of great ideas became the baseline for that project. And a lot of those things are being implemented by these individual trade partners today in their work as they're putting work and projects together for other clients. As far as the failures, I think we talked about the trust and developing the trust sooner in the project. I think that was one of those big things. Another one of them was about a third of the way through the project, the client said, hey, in addition to building a hospital and building it for this budget, we want it to be built to last. And we want you guys to factor in things that are more energy efficient and patient specific, like falls and cleanliness and quietness, and we want to kind of tie your feet to the fire a little bit to give us a building that's going to last us 30, 50, 60 years. So there was a new amendment to the contract called Exhibit G, which we had to kind of go back and make sure that our design supported the things that were requirements of our contract with the client and the team, us collaboratively, to ensure that the project was going to be a Energy Star efficient facility. It was going to provide patient care that was quiet and clean. So that was a challenge for us to overcome. We didn't have failures, we had constraints, and a constraint was anything that impeded our budget or our schedule, and we worked together as a team to resolve those constraints. We had what were called swarms, where we would all get together in the room, we would resolve, come up with our best resolution. If Tim, our owner's rep, wanted to ensure that we were heading in the right direction, he would say, yep, we agree, that's the way we want to go with that. And so again, that's where our tiebreaker was necessary. There were a few others, but we had many more successes than we had constraints. From opportunities, if nothing else, as a project team, be on a mission and stay committed to the two foundational principles of lean: respect for people and elimination of waste. Try to find improvements in everything we do. Our clients, our teams, our coworkers, and even our family will be better off tomorrow.
Small improvements. I love the last bullet point: managers and leaders model rather than talk about behaviors. That's amazing. Hey, I want to make sure we leave room for Q&A. So if each of you could just pick one of these words to talk about, and then we'll go to Q&A from there. So let's start with Tom.
Yeah, in looking at this, trust is the one that really spoke to me. We used a lot of similar product we've done, and we have to meet codes and standards, get deliverables to the AHJ. So that's all typical things. But in this case, the agreement with the team, even if I missed a deliverable, typically our deliverables are not, we call the whole package a milestone. The deliverable is me laying out lights in a certain area at a certain time. It wasn't like I would get, taken to the principal's office. It was, they would say, okay, what do we need to do to make this get back on time, on task? Who does it affect? And it was all a process. It wasn't a pointing fingers conversation. So when you walked into the space, you could be open and honest and know that people weren't going to throw you under the bus. They were willing to understand what happened, why it happened, and how to move forward. And that typically isn't seen in a typical design environment. So I think that's where the trust came in, because they still had trust that we were still going to meet the deadline, because we were always focused on how it affected the heads in beds, as we called it.
Nice. Thank you, Tom. Joe?
For me, it would be improvement, continuous improvement. Change is hard, and staying committed to a new or different process is most of the time uncomfortable, at least until it becomes a habit. And also getting people to look at every single thing that they do from the owner or the patient's perspective, to not be worried about their silo and or protecting, like Steve said, their back end or their return on investment, is challenging, and it takes practice and commitment. And we had, if anybody follows improvement gurus like Paul Akers, we had the father of 2-second lean come out to our project a couple of times to kind of explain, hey, here's how you guys can get committed to making changes and improvements. And then after, I think, his second visit, he was so impressed on our gains and improvements that he brought a group out to see what we were doing so that he could say, hey, here's an example of people that are committed to being committed on continuous improvement.
A great book, 2-Second Lean. If you haven't read it, I encourage it. Paul Akers is incredible when it comes to that. How about you, Steve?
Yeah, for me, Joe will tell you, I always go off the rails, so I don't ever follow the standard. But, it's hard for me to lock in on any one, because for me, trust is the foundation of the other three. It's hard to collaborate when people don't trust.
Yep.
It's hard for people to improve when they're afraid that when they throw out new ideas and innovation, that no one's going to listen or laugh at them. People don't commit if they don't trust you won't waste your time. Right. So, trust is like my highest, I understand that once I create an environment of trust, to maintain that trust, a requirement is that we're continuously improving, right? That people commit and they make worthwhile, trustworthy commitments, and that they are always open-minded and willing to collaborate, right? Not just sitting there nodding their head and just going to ignore me. For in my life, they play, an equal role. Trust being the highest. I always start with trust and work my way into the other three.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to open up for some questions here, and then we'll come back to the Plus Delta. So first question that we have is from, let me pull this up, is from Rick. And Rick says, I understand that the ownership wanted a high performance building with high indoor air quality and was designed to be LEED Gold. However, they didn't move forward with certifying. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct. They wanted, the owner wanted all the benefits of what LEED provided. They felt like paying for they felt no value in having the paper to prove it. They wanted all the bells and whistles. This owner just did not feel any value in having a piece of paper that's equally cost. You have to pay for it to get certified. They didn't feel there's any value in buying that certification, but they did want the benefit.
Okay. Next question, was there a professional IPD facilitator involved with the big room meetings?
We did have one. Wasn't full-time because this team was made up of about 70% previous lean, what we call big room experienced folks. We did bring one in on occasions when the team was missing in an area or challenged in an area to kind of help get us back on track. But in my first IPD, we had one that was on the team for the first 3 or 4 months. On this one, we brought that person as needed.
Well, one thing on that too is we, from a person, like from my perspective, not knowing a lot of these terms and things, that before we would do different things like the A3 and I can't remember all the different names of everything, but before we would do all these things, that there would be someone that would train us and understand what we were doing, why we were doing it, how to put it together, and then they would sort of manage that process. So I think we had IPD professionals that were able to manage the team, maybe because of what Steve said, that they already had done this for a while, but we definitely saw that in the team members themselves.
Yeah, I agree. We had big L's, like Steve had mentioned, folks that had been on integrated project teams, so had understood that role. We also allowed other folks to be the facilitators of the room so they could get the opportunity and experience leading the room. And we found out some of the more of the junior members on the project team were some of the better meeting facilitators.
Mhm.
Great, thank you. Next question. It sounds like this process made a very complex and potentially contentious project much less stressful for everyone. Is that correct? I don't see much of a downside except convincing the client that this extra cost expense is worth it.
From my point of view, that is absolutely true. It is always, I must admit, I don't know why to this day it's such a hard thing to convince an owner. I think just a lower stress level is enough. Go from there. Save money and less stress and did it early are all icing on the cake. But yeah, it's way less stressful. Most IPDs I've ever seen, 90 to 95% of achieve lower cost, quicker schedules, greater innovations in this kind of environment, and the people love it. Joe? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Nope.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo that. And 6 or 7 RFIs I think we had on the project in total.
Yeah,
and
6.
And we developed what submittals were required. So
Yep.
again, in comparison to a traditional job, we probably had 1/3 of the submittals that we had to review and process. None of that stuff adds value to the client or the project. And there's theoretically, there's more meetings and it may seem like it costs more, but the benefits are in the project schedule being delivered on time with less change orders and less challenges and less arguments at the end of the job. It's significantly more efficient.
And in this case, it's ahead of schedule.
Yeah, design is 2, 3, 4% of your overall cost. The gain on that cheap 2, 3, 4% can be enormous. It is really worth it because the real cost is in the material and the labor on the construction site, not in the design phase.
Nice. This question is from John. Where does the product manufacturer rep fit into the IPD process? In what stage are our services needed?
Well, I'm not sure which product manufacturer, but most of them were part of the conversation with the respective trade partners. We use prefabricated bathrooms on this project, so we had that manufacturer in the conversation when we were discussing or evaluating that as an option for the project, or for air handlers specifically, or some other type of piece of equipment that our trade partner would bring those folks into the conversation when they needed to be in the conversation.
Yeah, we had prefabricated OR ceilings. We did a cost analysis of dirt wall. We had quite a few manufacturers we considered and had the conversations with to see if that process provided true savings on delivery and or costs.
I don't see any additional questions in the chat box. Is there any additional questions from anyone on the call? Kaylee's all good. Okay, let's quickly, we're right on time here. Let's go to the plus delta. I asked you to be thinking about this during the presentation, what worked, what didn't. And I don't know, Kelly, if you can open this up for everybody to chime in if they want to, but we've got about 2 minutes for a plus delta. So I open it up to anyone. I'll assume that it's all positive then.
Yeah, if you want to hear, if the panelists can give you plus delta, I enjoyed your formatting, your organizing, very easy to flow, and I appreciate your moderating and the way you guys organize. I really, really do appreciate you starting this meeting by informing everyone of the plus delta and to be thinking about them as they go, because most of the times they don't hear about this to the end. Giving this to them at the beginning is a real improvement. So congrats.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but in closing, Tom, Joe, and Steve, thank you very, very much for your time this morning. Any final comments we'll go down the road real quick. Tom, any final comments, thoughts?
The only thing I wanted to add is we didn't speak too much about is our risk log. We were always focusing on what if conversations and keeping those numbers understood and in front of the owner. So I don't know. To me, that was a different conversation because typically I hadn't seen that kind of conversation come up so early in a project before.
We'll have to have you guys back on another panel discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joe, any thoughts? Final comments?
Yeah, we can talk for hours. There were a lot of lessons learned and a lot of good takeaways from the project and a lot of things that we're incorporating today in our project deliveries. But the one thing I can offer the team is everybody out there, just go out and make one small improvement today.
Mm-hmm. And Steve.
Yeah, I'm with Joe. Every contract I get to do doesn't get to be an IFOA, but how we work and how we approach the work is our choice, not the owner's. And so we choose to approach it in a collaborative approach. We seek out those who will collaborate us as much as we can, and try to create a collaborative environment as much as we can, even when it's not the direction of the owner. That it is our charge as designers to create that environment as much as we can. A lot of our clients are going there, like Kaiser's and others are committing 100% to go there. But as organizations, it takes a long time. I'm hoping that our industry as a whole will adapt it and accept it sooner rather than later, because the rest of the world is leaving us behind in this regard.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Well, everyone, on behalf of the panelists, on behalf of AIA Las Vegas, and behalf of Imagine It, who sponsors today's program, stay safe, have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.